Can we really experience God? Can we hear his voice? Can we discern his will for our lives? We're going to discuss these things and much more with Dr. Richard Blackaby coming right up. Dr. Blackaby, it is a pleasure to have you on Raven's Heart this evening.
It's good to be with you.
Thank you very much. I have my copy of Experiencing God right here in my hands. This book, as we were talking earlier, really messed up my plans for my life.
It should have a warning on the cover to alert you to that possibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This book was groundbreaking, both for me and my wife. And that's why I'm excited to have you on with us, because I really believe that every believer needs to read this book. It really helps understand the will of God. And it says right here on the cover, knowing and doing the will of God. Very, very important. And before we dive into doing and knowing the will of God, I think the will of God is one of those terms a lot of times we use, but we really don't understand what it means. Can you share with us your understanding of what the will of God is, especially in the context of a person's life?
Yeah, and you know from going through Experiencing God, my dad taught that you need to begin by approaching it God-centered, not self-centered. I think that's one of the big problems for folks is we think, well, I want to know what God's will is for me, and what color, which blouse should I wear to work today? What entree should I order at the restaurant? And you can become almost immobilized by fretting about, did I get God's will right all the time? Did I miss it? And I literally have known people that, I mean, they just about had to pray whether to come out of the rain or not. And that's not what you see in the Bible. God does have a purpose for your life. His will is his purpose. And so you begin by saying, what is it that God is doing around my life? What is God doing in my church, my neighborhood, my world? And you begin with him, and then you ask in God, how do you want my life to be a part of that? And if you start from a God-centered perspective, it's amazing how it addresses a lot of the issues. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have some specific things he wants you to do, but don't get so bogged down in, I just want to know what I'm supposed to do. And God, what are you thinking about for me? It's more, God, what are you thinking about? What's on your heart? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And then once I know what you're trying to do, God, then I'll have a sense of what I should do. And so that's always a big one. But I do believe that God does have a purpose for everyone. And there's, especially young people today, there's a lot of depression, there's a lot of suicide, there's a lot of despair that their life has no purpose, has no meaning. And so I think if there was ever a time for us to say, God has always had a purpose for your life. He's always known that you would occupy the planet right now. And so the key is just saying, so God, why did you put me here? Why did you wire me the way you did? Give me the skills you have. What is it? How is it my life can bring glory to you? And God has some very specific things that he'll lead you to do if you want to live your life to the glory of God and fulfill the purposes he has for you.
You just said a second ago, and I want to go back to this, about seeing what's going on around you. And that's not self-centered, but that's God-centered. Can you explain that a little bit more? How do we put these things together? To me, it's kind of like an intelligence problem where you're putting together all the dots to connect the dots to see what's going on, like an intelligence analyst would do. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, I do say that oftentimes knowing God's will is connecting the spiritual dots. If you pray in the morning, God, show me your will, then you better keep your spiritual eyes and ears open for what comes next. And a lot of times we say, God, guide me. And then we completely ignore everything, every message coming our way. I remember several years ago, I work a lot with business people, and I was discipling a group of very high level Christian CEOs. And this one guy, his company had merged with another company, and he was the odd man out, and so he had to find a new job. And so it wasn't long before a very prominent company approached him to be the CEO, But this company was not really aligned with his Christian values. He knew from the outset that there wasn't a good fit, but they were quite aggressive. They were offering a great pay package. There wasn't really any other serious offers. And so he told me later in our discipleship group in front of a bunch of other people, he said, Richard, you and your dad teach that God guides you, that God will speak to you. But he said, I asked God, he said, I prayed. I said, God, if you don't want me to take this job, then let me know that. Close the door, which is not a good way to pray, but that's what he did. And he said, and then God was silent. He said, God never said a thing. He said, so maybe he speaks to you, but he doesn't speak to me. And so I didn't know a lot of the details, but I just began and said, well, tell me, like, what did your wife think about this job offer? And he said, oh, she was totally against it from the very beginning. But he said, but she's never led a major company like this. She's my wife. And I said, well, were you praying with anyone? Did you have Christians walking with you, praying with you? Yeah, I'm in a group. I said, well, what did they think? He said, well, there were several that had a lot of red flags, but none of them leads a company the size I was dealing with. And so I just began asking him question after question. I said, any just random things, maybe a sermon you heard, maybe a quiet time where there was a check in your spirit or something, or you heard a song playing that just suddenly caught you, just stopped you cold. He said, well, one day my 15-year-old son just out of the blue said, Dad, you're not going to take that job at that company, are you? And he said, but he's 15. I can't make career moves based on what a 15-year-old says. And everybody in the room is just like their jaws are dropping. And finally, it just dawns on this guy what he's saying. I said, listen, you asked God to guide you, and then you discounted every messenger he sent your way. I said, if you're going to ask God to guide you, then be open. And that doesn't mean that everything someone says is necessarily from God.
Right.
Obviously, the spirit within you's got to confirm that. But that's what I call connecting the spiritual dots. It's saying, God, guide me, and then pay attention to what happens. Pay attention to what you read as you're in the scriptures each day and what God puts on your heart as you pray. And you might be blown away by the messages that start coming. And it's always good to run it past other believers praying for you. Of course, God's never going to say anything to you that contradicts his word. So that's a guardrail for you. But I've just found that many times as I work with people, the problem is not that God doesn't speak; it's that they don't recognize His voice. They don't recognize, that feeling I had, that was God. That wasn't just a thought that I had. And you just have to realize, if you're a believer, you've got the Holy Spirit dwelling within you, and He's a person, and He knows your future. He knows God's will. He knows what tomorrow holds, and if you'll trust His guidance, then he'll help guide you to make important decisions along the way.
What are some ways that we can tune our ears better, and some ways that we can have our eyes open? And hey, we've got Peter Keeter on. He's from South Africa, but living in South Carolina now. Peter, welcome to the show. And he said he liked what you just said. So, but what are some ways that we can tune our ears to hear the Spirit of the Lord and open our eyes to see what's going on, so there's not that disconnect? How can we sharpen ourselves?
Well, there's several things I'd say. One is just get your heart to a place of neutrality where you honestly are open to whatever it is God has for you. There's a lot of times we are not open to God leading us in certain directions to do certain things. You might say, I don't care what God says, I am not going to speak in public. So if an invitation comes to share with your men's group, you automatically assume that can't be God. So to get to a place of neutrality that says, God, I just want what you want. And if you can get there, you're well on your way to being prepared to hear from God. But then you got to be in God's word. And wherever you are in God's word, I'd encourage you to always be in the gospel somewhere. You just want to get around Jesus. Just watch what was on his heart. Watch how he dealt with people. Watch what mattered to him, what didn't matter to him. And if you get to really know Jesus well in the scriptures, then you're going to recognize when he begins speaking to you, because he's going to speak to you the same way he spoke to people in the Gospels. He hasn't changed. He cares about the very same things. He has the same tone of voice. He views sin. He views holiness. He views brokenness the same way he always has. So get to know him well. and then watch and see how he dealt with other people. What did he got? What did he ask them to do? He never asked anybody to ever abandon their spouse and marry their mistress. So I doubt he's going to tell you to do that today. So get to find out the kind of things he does talk about. And by the way, I just say again, if you watch in the Bible where God is guiding someone, it's usually to fulfill God's purposes through their life. So like Moses, every time God speaks to Moses, it's basically to get him aligned so he can deliver all the Israelites out of Egypt, to get them in the promised land, to know what his law is, what his will is. But not once do you ever hear God telling Moses what to wear that day or what to eat that day. That stuff is mundane. He'll let you figure a lot of that out yourself, because it doesn't really, unless it furthers God's purpose in some way. Sometimes I think it does matter which restaurant you choose to eat in, because he may be working in one of the attendants' hearts at that point, and you need to be in the restaurant where God's at work in someone's life that day. So sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't. That's why you just have to trust God, but know what's on his heart, know what he cares about. He cares about people. So that. So every time, wherever you are, just be aware of who are the people around me that God's put here right now. I try to do that. I fly a lot. Not everybody that I sit next to wants to talk or wants to talk about God, but I usually try to check it out. They throw their headphones on right away and look out the window, and I'm not going to be obnoxious about it. But I want to try to at least throw out a question or two, just a comment. And if they seem open and interested, I'll say, okay, God, help me to know if this is something you're doing today, or this is or not. And so wherever you are, just have your spiritual senses open, and it might surprise you. I suspect God's probably more active around you than you might even realize.
I want to ask you about the I'm never going to do that factor. This is something that I've run into. There have been many things that I've said in my life, I'm never going to do that, or I'm never going to do that again. And then all of a sudden I find myself, God directing me in that direction to do those things. Is that something that you've encountered with other people, or am I just some sort of weirdo that just seems to happen to you?
Well, I've had people, I've been in a number of settings where someone said, I'm never going to do that. And their friends will say, oh, don't say that. If God hears you say that, then that for sure enough, that's he's going to ask you to do that. I don't think God it takes delight in trying to, make you do stuff you don't like. But God, Paul said, his strength is revealed in our weakness. And so a lot of times the reason we don't want to do something is because we don't think we're any good at it, or we don't like it. Or we failed at it before. Think about Moses. He's a murderer. He's a fugitive. He's not even one. He's a wanted man in Egypt. Like, lots of reasons why he would never want to try to deliver another Hebrew in Egypt. And then what does God say? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to have you do, because it's in you. Everybody will know it was not you, Moses, who did it, but it was me. And so there are times where, God will, it's not to punish you. It's to let you, because if he asked you just to do stuff you're really good at, you'd always kind of wonder, well, was that just me? I mean, I've always been good at that, so maybe that was just me. But sometimes I think God really wants you to put you in a place where you have to walk by faith. In fact, Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. So there has to be some area of your life where you're doing something that requires faith. And that typically isn't doing stuff we're good at. It's usually doing stuff we're not good at. So just count on it. God's going to drive you in some area of your life, at least, where you have to have faith, because otherwise, as Hebrews says, you're not going to be pleasing to God. So that sometimes he's going to do that. And I think not to punish you, not to say, I caught you. I heard that. I heard you say you'd never do that. So I'm going to get into a battle of wills with you over that. I don't really feel like he does that, but he does know you better than you know yourself. And I always think about, I had my oldest son was an average student in school. It actually wasn't that studious. I don't know what kind of a student he really was, because that was not primary in his focus at the time. But he got through high school, and I said, well, son, what do you think God wants you to do next? he said, "Well," he said, "I don't know. I kind of feel like maybe he wants me to go to university, but he said I'm not smart enough to go to university." I said, "Well, the question is not how smart you are. The question is what does God want you to do?" So he ends up going to university, graduates. I said, "Well, son, now what do you think God wants you to do?" "Well, I kind of feel like he wants me to go to seminary and get a master's degree, but no way am I smart enough to do that." I said, "Well, Mike, the question is not how smart you are. The question is what is God asking you to do? If he asks you to go to university, he'll equip you to do that." Well, he
Yeah.
goes, he graduates, gets his master's degree. A year or two later, "Well, Mike, now what do you think God wants you to do?" And he starts laughing and said, "Well, this will sound crazy, but I can't get the thought of PhD studies out of my mind." But he said, "There's no way." I said, "Mike, like, just don't keep telling me what you can't do. Just tell me what you think God is asking you to do."
Mhm.
Well, he's a PhD now. Has written about 5 or 6 books, and but
Wow.
I think sometimes what we're saying we can't or won't do, God is saying, "But I wired you to do that. I can enable you to do that. You're gonna limit yourself
Yeah.
way below the purpose I have for you." And so I think just like as a parent, I hated that when my kids were settling for less than what I knew they were capable of. I think oftentimes that's how God deals with us. By what we're limiting ourselves, God's saying, "No, no, that's actually some of the best moments of your life will be as you do that. I'm just not going to let you get away with shutting that down in your life when I
Mhm.
know what it could do for you."
Mhm. Yeah, that reminds me of something my mom said to me when I was like 11 or 12 years old, and we grew up. I grew up in an Episcopal church. We were not believers in the sense at that time we went to church and did the religious thing, but she just looked at me and she said, you need to be a priest. I really think you need to be a priest. And I looked at her, I said, no, I'm not going to do that because I've got enough problems of my own and I can't deal with anybody else's problems. And look at me now, mom, somewhat that way.
I,
We have Jermaine on with us. Jermaine, he says, we can often settle for way less than what God has for us. That is exactly right.
yeah, oh, for sure.
And when it comes to discerning the will of God, this is something that I've come across with some believers, and a lot of them are very young in their faith. When they say this, they say, "Well, I can't discern God's will in my life. There's only a few people, that's only the special people that can do that." Can everybody discern? Everybody that's a believer discern what God's will is for their life? I mean, even a young believer in Jesus.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you have to be careful because God actually specializes in working through ordinary people. So don't tell God you're too ordinary for him to have a purpose for you. But
Mm,
there's levels of God's will too. And of course, there's a lot of revealed will of God. Just open your Bible and God will
yeah.
say, forgive people, love people, minister to the needy. There's this, put your anger aside. Don't be in bondage to your anger. There's plenty of, focus on things that are lovely and pure, not that are evil. And so, yeah, you just read the Bible a few pages, and you'll discover God's will for your life. And so, put all those in. If you're not doing the basics, then don't necessarily be bewildered if he's not giving you a lot of high level details. It's
Mm,
you start at ground level, and as you're doing those things, then I think the farther you go in just doing what you know God's will is, then that's where God can start to define it a little more specifically. And he does that. And I don't want to make it sound like it's all just a burning bush all the time. God's a person. The Holy Spirit is a person dwelling within you that can speak right to your spirit, can tell you things. I had I'm kind of living through an unusual experience for me. It just doesn't happen all the time, but it's kind of a good example. Back in December, I just had a severely herniated disc in my back, lower back, and I was in so much pain that so there were nights I couldn't lie down. I had to, and I couldn't
mm.
stand up. I could, if I was sitting, is the only way it didn't hurt, and just excruciating. My whole left leg was numb. And so it's a longer story, but after a couple of months of that, I finally gone to a doctor. He said, he looked at the MRI. He said, "Hey, this is serious. I need to do surgery on you as soon as possible. As soon as we can get you in the hospital room, I'm doing major back surgery. You're going to be basically out for 3 months where you can't lift anything and you're going to have to cancel a bunch of your travel and so on. And it's very disruptive. And I mean, I'm not against surgery or anything like that. I booked, made a deposit. I got on the schedule for several weeks out. And then one day I'm driving back from a dentist's office and it's from downtown Atlanta to where I live in the south part of the city. And I just have this very, very distinct impression that there's a certain man I need to call. And my dad had just died not long before that. And I just felt like, oh, maybe I just need to call and tell the guy that my dad died. But I mean, I've got a funeral to get ready for. I've been out of the country for 2 weeks. I just got back. So I'm just very, very busy, and I don't really have time just to be making phone calls. And this particular guy, um, I had not called him in probably 3 years. So I mean, it's not like I call him all the time. It had been 3 years since the last time. And this guy's maybe called me once ever, and that was 5 years ago. So I mean, we don't talk that way at least. And so, but I'm driving home, and I tell you, it was as strong of an impression. I didn't hear any audible voice or anything, but in my mind, I just felt this very distinct. You need to call this guy. So anyway, I decided, okay, well, God, but I'm gonna have to make this quick because I got a lot of stuff to do. I've been out of town for 2 weeks. I got tons of things to take care of. And so I get to my house. I've got this automatic kind of coffee maker. So I thought, well, before I do God's will, I need a cup of coffee. So I'm going to just sit. So I'm dripping some coffee. I'm going to grab that mug. My office is down in the basement. I'm going to go down and sit at my desk. I'm going to call that. That's the only guy I'm going to call. And then I'm going to get on with my work. And literally, as I'm standing there just watching my coffee drip so I can grab my mug and head down to my desk where I'm talking to you from now, my phone starts ringing. And I look at my phone. It's that guy. He's calling me. And he's not called me in 5 years. I've not called him in 3 years. And I'm literally 2 minutes away from calling this man, and he's calling me. I mean, my heart just stops. It's like, what on earth? So I answer the phone, and he had heard that my dad died, and that's why he's actually calling me. So I thought that's what I was supposed to talk to him about. So I mean, but he already knows. So we had a little visit, and then finally, I'm trying to shut it down. Like I'm like, "Hey, listen, thanks for calling. That just really meant a lot to me." And like I'm literally just like trying to land the plane, and then right as I'm about to just like hit, disconnect here, he says, "Hey, listen, before you go, what can I pray for you about?" And I stopped and I said, "Well, listen, like I got this horrible back issue, and just pray for me. Like it looks like I'm gonna have to have surgery, and I'll be out a couple of months." And he just jumps all over it and says, "Listen, I got this guy in North Atlanta. You got to go see, and he's done wonders for me and my wife." And I'm like, everybody's knows a guy. Like I don't have
Yeah,
time.
everybody does. Yeah.
And this guy that he knows, literally, his office is 50 miles from where I live. You're driving 50 miles from South Atlanta into North Atlanta. You haven't left Atlanta, and you're driven 50 miles right through downtown Atlanta. And I'm like, I just can't do that. That's going to take too long. But so anyway, I don't even call him for like a week or so. And now I'm about to leave town for one last trip before I go under the knife. And I just feel this impression that they're telling me this surgery is going to be very intrusive. It's going to be, it could end up complicating other issues in my back and so on. And I just think, I never did call the guy, and I know this friend's going to see me again. He's going to ask me, did I follow his advice? So I got to at least tell him that I at least tried. I at least tried to call. So I called that guy's office, and he says, I have an opening tomorrow. And so I just said to my wife, just to keep a friendship, I'm going to waste an entire afternoon before I leave town for 5 days. I hate to have to spend that time just driving all afternoon, but I go up there. Well, they put me on this treatment. They work me over for an hour and do some special kind of things that they've got at that place. And I'm feeling great. And I come home, I go for this trip. All of a sudden, there's no more numbness. I'm walking normally. I'm sleeping normally. And I call and I canceled the surgery. And I feel great to this day. That was back in March. And I'm like, why did God alert me that I needed to talk to that? That's partly why finally I just took it seriously. It's like, I mean, the guy could have just called me, right? And he could have called me and checked in on me, and that would have been fine. But why does God tell me 2 minutes or so, or really, well, while I was driving 30 minutes before, but literally, why does he alert me 30 minutes before this guy is going to call that I need to talk to him? Unless God's trying to say, you're going to hear something from this guy you need to pay attention to. And like I've written
Mhm.
books on hearing God's voice, like
Yeah.
right. So like I believe that God speaks, but when you get busy and you just think this is a back issue, this isn't God,
Yeah.
this isn't about me going to Africa as a missionary. I've just got back pain, right? But there are times I think that God, I mean, there were a bunch of speaking engagements and ministry that I was going to have to back out of, and I
Mhm.
just like God just and I think that if I'd had the surgery, it could have ended up crippling me for years, and years down the road.
Yeah.
And so it's like God just literally just but and he doesn't do that all the time in that way with me. But I'll
Yeah.
tell you what, I am so just deliriously happy that I never had any surgery, never had a shot. Like they've just it's gone. The pain's gone. And
That's a miracle.
anyway, like, would God have more to say to us if we would just listen and then I almost didn't respond. Like it was almost 2 weeks until I actually made the call. So I
Mm.
almost missed it. Like I already had my surgery booked. I'd already made a $1,500 deposit to have surgery on my back. And I'm already invested in this. And God's trying to say, don't do it. Let me help you here. Let me guide you. So I mean, sometimes I think God, and I'm living through that right now. Like that's so anyway, I could say a lot more about that, but I'm experiencing what happens when you pay attention, you connect some dots, and you just
Yes.
it didn't make sense. Like it seemed like it was going to just be impossible to do. And
Mhm.
like I was thinking I'd have to go for months, 5 days a week, driving all the way across Atlanta. I've been there less than 10 times over since I started going, and I haven't been there in 3 weeks. I won't be going much longer. It wasn't nearly as bad as I had sort of assumed it would be.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, I just wonder if some of your listeners, I would just encourage people, just pay attention. There may
Mhm.
be something God's trying to alert you to, and He's putting people in your life. He's drawing your attention to some truths. You hear something in a sermon, and there just might be more to it than what you realize.
Wow. Wow. We've got some comments. That testimony really encouraged some of our viewers. Peter says, praise God. Testimony that was a real encouragement to him.
Oh, good.
And Jermaine, who is also, we got the Georgia connection going on tonight. He lives in Georgia as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah, yeah, we got the Georgia connection. He says it's about, he mentions the obedience in listening. And that obedience, I guess, is what you mean in here by knowing and doing the will
Yeah,
of God. And I
yeah.
think a lot of times that word obedience in the context of the Christian faith has been perverted and abused to make it sound like you're this slave to this force that's making you do things that you don't want to do, but it's not about that. And can you talk a little bit more about doing the will of God? Why is there sometimes this disconnect, even in your own instance, this disconnect between hearing what God's showing you and sometimes screaming, and then actually being obedient and doing the will of God?
Yeah, there's lots of reasons for that. I think, we just in kind of the Christian subculture, I guess, that I spend a lot of time in, we love Bible studies. We love learning. We love reading. I've got lots of books. I love reading. And sometimes we are convinced that by knowing about things, it's the same thing as practicing things.
Mm,
It's like I read a lot about faith. That doesn't mean I'm walking by faith. It just I may believe in faith. I'm not practicing it. Or I believe that Christians should forgive, but there's a real jerk in my life. I just am not going to forgive. And so we sometimes just assume because we believe something or know something that it's equivalent to practicing it.
mm,
And I think that's a great lie. It's a great deception. Uh,
yeah.
I think there'd be worldwide revival right now if Christians just simply practiced everything they already know. We don't. It's always great to learn new things, but there's lots of stuff we're not practicing that we already know. And so I'd always want to start there. But and then sometimes, it's we think that good intentions are the same things as obedience too. And
Ooh.
we've say, I think in the book, we often talk about just delayed obedience. It's like, well, God, I am going to do that, but right now I've been really busy. Or right now I don't have the money to do that. Or right now I'm really distracted. I don't think I could add anything else to my life right now, but I will, And so it's kind of like I owe an IOU, God. I will obey, but not yet. And we would say delayed obedience is actually disobedience.
Yes.
The moment God tells you something, you need to start looking right now to how to implement that, not put that on your to-do list. When God speaks, my dad used to always say, God doesn't make suggestions, and God issues commands. When he speaks, it's not for you to just sort of, let me think about that. That's no, he spoke so that you could obey. And you're right. Obedience, especially for grown adults, it seems sort of demeaning. It seems like
Uh-huh.
something a preschooler does, but we're an adult. But what you learn is obedience brings freedom. God
Wow.
knows how you're wired. He knows your future. He knows how to give you abundant life. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to lead you into abundant life. And so, yeah, obedience is simply going through the next door that he puts in front of you to say, just follow me here and you'll have a life like you couldn't have believed. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a restrictive thing. That's he's trying to give you life and life
Yeah.
abundantly. And so that's what obedience leads to. But the world has made that. I mean, the world makes us feel bad about teaching our children to obey.
Yes, it does.
That's somehow a bad thing that kids learn to obey their parents. And so of course we just have so many bad connotations with that. But
Yeah.
if you understood that God never does anything in your life except out of perfect love, why would you not want to obey someone that is only motivated by a love beyond anything we've ever experienced? And that's what drives everything he does in your life. So you can trust him. He's not going to abuse that. Everything he does, as you obey, you're going to look back and say, what a loving God that
Mhm.
led me to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he knows more than we do.
A lot more.
A lot more than we do. So we're going to think that, oh, yeah, God, I got this. I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. And my wife, this book also messed up her life as well. She went through it and was totally blown away by it and really assisted in her walk. She says, wow, that is huge truth about obedience and disobedience, and delayed obedience actually being disobedience. And really, I'm thinking about what Saul said to Samuel said to Saul, that to obey is better than sacrifice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And he hadn't obeyed, but he was saying, but I did what I thought was best. I
Yeah.
know I didn't do quite what you told me to do, but I interpreted that to be what I thought was best. And then Saul wants it to be labeled as obedience. And
Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
and a lot of times we do that. Well, I want to customize what you told me to do, God, to be something I'm comfortable with, but I want to call it obedience. And God would say that looks nothing like what I was telling you to do. That's not obedience. Uh,
Wow.
and so yeah, we're kind of told that it's kind of like my truth. It's like, well, it's my obedience. It's obedience as it appears to me. And
Yeah.
obedience is based on how it appears to God.
Yes. I'm just thinking of going back to the 1990s with those Andre the Giant stickers where it said obey on. I think I'm just going to buy a bunch of those and stick those around my office. So after I'm done reading my Bible in the morning, I'm just going to look up and see the obey stickers. There was something that you said that was just really profound, and I want to go back to it. And Mark 1, thank you for joining us this evening. He says, simple truth, really good stuff. A lot resonating tonight, Dr. Blackaby.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you so
Yeah.
much for joining our viewers and this program tonight. As I was preparing for this, the Lord kind of showed me the same thing with obedience and following his will, that it leads to freedom. And I was reading Psalm 143 at verse 10, where the psalmist wrote, teach me to do thy will. And I learned better how to do that through this book. For thou art my God, thy spirit is good. He's good. He's going to lead us in the right direction. His will is good. Lead me to the land of uprightness. And I was like, what does this word uprightness really mean? Because I was thinking, well, a land without sin, land with integrity. But really, what it means is a land without obstacles, a flow, a freedom is really what it's pointing to, a plateau. And I was like, wow, that really just changed what I was thinking about following the will of God. And you just confirmed that with
Mm.
obedience leads to freedom, because we can truly be who we have been called to be. And that's what this is all about. I
Mm.
want to talk about for a few moments. I know there's some people, and we've addressed it a little bit, that are afraid to follow the will of God or really dig into listening to what God is saying. There's a lot of misconceptions and false perceptions. How can somebody really tell for certain that what they're hearing or what they're seeing is of God and not their flesh or of the devil? Because a lot of people are concerned about that, and that's a
Yeah,
hindrance
they
for
are.
them.
Yeah, and you have an impression. I think I feel like I should quit my job. Well, is that God? Is he trying to take me somewhere better? Is that Satan just trying to mess up my life and ruin my finances? Is that just me because I just don't have the stick to itiveness when things get tough and I just want a quick easy out? Like, and so those are great questions. My dad used to always say, if you can't tell the difference between God's voice and Satan's voice, you are very vulnerable,
Mm,
because Satan can just have a field day with you, just telling you all kinds of stuff to mess you up. So it is important that you know the difference. And so, a couple things I'd say, like we touched on it earlier, but number one, just become very familiar with God's voice so that you recognize a counterfeit. They often say that the people who work with in the counterfeit part of the police department, they spend more time looking at the real deal, what a real
mhm,
dollar looks like, so that they recognize when something doesn't look like that. There's an unlimited supply of counterfeits. There's only one real, authentic dollar bill. So you look at that and you become an expert in what's real. And so I'd say and you can just kind of tell the difference with certainly with Satan, because he's a liar. He's going to just keep telling you things that aren't true.
mm,
He's going to tell you, Jesus said in John 8:32, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free.
yeah.
So, but Satan tells lies that lead you to bondage. That Satan tells lies that separates you from people, that alienates you from other people. God leads you into unity, leads you into community, leads you into healing, not brokenness. And so, a lot of times, just watch, just look down the road. If I keep following this voice, where's that going to lead to? Is it
Mhm,
leading to freedom, or is it leading to broken relationships, to guilt, to regret? And then I just say that's why you need to be walking in community. You need to don't make decisions in isolation, because we can fool ourselves. Our hearts are desperately wicked and evil, and deceitful, and so you can't trust your heart that way. You need, and that's why I did several things in my life just to try to protect myself. And one was I always had some prayer partners. Any major decision, I bounced it off people that knew me well, and they felt totally free to speak the truth to me. They weren't impressed by me. They just call me out, say that just sounds kind of prideful. That's you're not you sound you're trying to sound spiritual, but that sounds awfully prideful or whatever. And they'd call me out, and it was very helpful to me to have that. I just dared not just trust myself. And one other thing I did, I'm not saying everyone should do this, but uh, I like to. I like accolades. I like people to think highly of me. I like to be wanted, and so I if I were to get certain job opportunities, if I thought I could get to some prominent job position, that might not really be God. That might just be my ego wanting a bigger job or a higher pay. And
mhm,
so I just decided in my life, at least, again, I'm not saying everyone should do this, but since I've been an adult, I have not applied for a job. I've moved a couple times to different jobs, but those jobs have always come to me.
mhm,
Whatever job gave me, I just tried to work to the best of my ability. I tried to achieve just whatever got, to exceed any expectations, to do more than my job description. And inevitably, someone would come to me and say, "Listen, we've been watching you over there, and we think you'd be perfect for this job over
Yes.
here. And so I'd okay. So I never submitted a resume, never filled out an application. I had people coming to me. And, again, God may have different ways for you to do that, but I know for me, I was in danger of being flattered by just thinking, "Oh, I could do that. That
Mhm.
looks like a better job. I'm gonna apply for that, see if I can at least put an application in, maybe I'll get it." And then I wouldn't have been doing a good job where I was. I'd be always looking down the road to see what was better. And
Right.
so for me, I just thought, well, I'll just I probably would overestimate what I should be doing, and so I'm just gonna not even go down that path. I'm gonna just happily do whatever it is God gives me, and, if God wants to move me to something else, he'll have to make that clear to me,
Mhm.
and so I've had probably 3 major careers in my life, major roles I've had of leadership, and they've always come to me, and God's always made it clear that, this was of him, and so, I thought, well, that's one way I can be careful, because I think my ego might make me run down some paths looking for something better,
Mhm.
or I would just get frustrated with something hard and where I was and just wanna quit and find something easier, and so I'm just not gonna even I'm gonna try to guard myself against that, but there's lots of so be in community, take time to pray. Don't feel like what happens sometimes is you hear a voice and then suddenly you're trying to spiritually catch up. You've been kind of
Mhm.
careless, neglectful of your walk with God, and all of a sudden you're having this opportunity or this impression, and you're not ready to process it.
Right.
Now you're trying to quickly get caught up with God, and I'd say, well, don't do that. Stay caught up. Keep current with God. So when you do hear a voice or you do have an impression, you're in a place to evaluate it and recognize if that's God or not.
Mhm. Mhm. I can agree with you on the job search situation. I've come to that place in my life now where if I have to interview for a job or really put in an application for it, I feel the same way. Was that something that you grew into? Because I remember getting out of college and stuff and turning in applications for jobs, just getting the start. And then as I've matured, it's like, if I'm going to go the path that God really wants me to go, is that something that you grew into?
Yeah, when I was in college, or just finding summer jobs and things, I'd be out there trying to just find work for the summer so I could get back into school. And even then, God really, the best jobs I ever had were ones that God provided for me that I
Mhm.
wasn't even looking for, that I even didn't even know about. But yeah, I've learned to trust God in the process. I think the problem a lot of times is we don't trust God, and so we feel like, well, God, I know you said you love me and you have a wonderful plan for my life, but what if you don't? What if you are just so busy in the Middle East or somewhere else you don't have time to help me kind of find a wife or get a
Mhm.
job, and so I better be on that myself, and it's really a lack of faith, it's a lack of trust,
Mhm.
and so over the years, God has just been so faithful. It's not like He's made me rich or famous, but He's been good, and my life has
Yes.
been great, and family's great. The stuff that matters is wonderful, and I've just learned I can trust Him, and so I'm just not going to sweat it, when stuff
Yeah.
happens, and then you save yourself a lot of time. You're not being anxious all the time about the future, but you just be in the moment. But this is the job God has me in right now, so I want to be a blessing to everybody, all my coworkers, and to the customers I deal with, and I. I I want them, if I ever do get moved on, I want them to all be sorry and sad to see me go, because
Yes.
while I was here, I was the best employee that God could make me to be, and that's just a much better way to live than fretting all the time and trying to figure
Yes.
out, how can I get a little ahead? How can I get a 30 cents an hour raise somewhere to working somewhere else? And you can kind of get so stressed about that, you miss the joy of just being where God has you right now.
My coworker and I, we often say that, and he said this to me numerous times. The best job that you have is the one that you have right now.
Yeah.
That's the best
Yeah.
job. But live in the moment is basically what it comes down to, and it's God's will. It says it in Psalm 143 at verse 10. That His Spirit is good, and He's going to lead us into goodness. He's got good things that He intends for us. I want to talk about, before we close out tonight, a little bit more about the faith factor,
Yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of people do things that they say, "Hey, I'm moving in faith," and it was really not the smartest thing for them to do. And then I've seen people move in faith, and it's like, "Whoa, that doesn't seem like it'd be the smartest thing to do, but it's really working, and God is blessing." How
Mm.
can we discern when we're trying to walk in obedience to God's will, the difference between faith and foolishness? Can you give some insight on into
Yeah,
that?
sometimes it's what we're doing, we call it faith, but it's really presumption. We're presuming that whatever we come up with, and if we have enough faith, that God will bless it. And so I've seen that a lot where, and oftentimes it's to do good stuff. Like I knew a young man years ago, very passionate, and he just had this vision that he was going to quit his job, sell his house. He's going to help kind of build a conference center that people could be ministered to, and he had no training, no Bible college or anything, but he just felt like God would bless that and send people there that needed his ministry, and people would want to donate money to support him. And well, he lost everything, and then he's discouraged, and he's like, well, I was doing this for God. It wasn't like I was trying to get rich. I was going to serve him. But it's like, but yeah, but did God tell you to do that? If you'd bounced that off me, I could have told you that there's 3 other uh, conference centers just like the one you tried to build that are already out there that are not even fully engaged as it is. There doesn't even seem to be necessarily a need for that, and they've got well-trained, qualified people there, unlike you. And
Mhm.
so it doesn't mean God might not ever ask you to do something like that, but you want to really make sure that it's God
Yeah.
that's inviting you. There's a lot of bad teaching that just says, in fact, people can be encouraged and they'll say, well, you just need to dream a really big dream and do it for God and come up with a really bold vision for the kingdom, and then just ask God to bless it. But that's not what you see in the Bible. God already has the vision. God already has the dream.
Mm.
He's just looking to invite you into what he's going to do. And if you know that that's what God's asking you to do, if you know that this is a God thing and he's inviting you, come join me, then by all means, you have all the faith you can, and you can do some crazy things. My dad was a pastor in California when he was asked to come to a church of 10 people they literally were ready to disband the whole church. When he went there to talk to them, they had a for sale sign in front of the church, and assuming that they couldn't make a go of it, and they're asking my dad to move his family of 7 to go be their pastor when there's only 10 people left.
Yeah.
Every People said, "You're crazy. You're like, Henry, you got 5 kids. How are you gonna send them to college? How you feed them?" And my dad said, "Well, it would be crazy if I hadn't heard from God, but I know God's asking me to do this, so I'm going." And literally millions of dollars came in to support that
Wow.
church and all the mission churches that we started 38 mission churches out of that, and a Bible college, and all 5 of my siblings and I felt called into ministry. We're all in ministry to this day. Looking back, it was the smartest thing my dad ever did, but at the time, it appeared absolutely crazy. But the key was my dad would say, well, if you had heard what I heard from God, you would know it's not crazy. But since
Mhm.
you haven't heard from God like I have, of course it appears crazy to you. But the difference is I've heard from God. So yeah, so don't presume. Don't. And there is teaching that just says you come up with a plan and promise to give all the glory to God, and then He'll be happy to make it successful. But the model prayer does not say, "My will be done." It says, "God, Your will be done." God is always invested in having His will be done. He'll provide every resource of heaven to make sure that's accomplished.
Yes.
But He's not
Yes.
obligated to make your will be done, make your dreams come true. So uh, get God's dream, God's vision, and then you're going to have a really exciting life.
That is so awesome. And Mark says, Proverbs 15:22, plans fail for a lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. And
Yeah.
we were talking about that just a few minutes ago, of that
Just
having
surround
that.
yourself, enlist counsel. Don't wait for someone to come volunteer to be your counselor. You go find you look for godly people and you ask them to walk with you, and you get the best counselors around you you can. It's one of the wisest, safest things you could possibly do.
Yes. And what you were just talking about a few moments ago, I wrote it down because I didn't want to miss it and I wanted to capture it. Doing something for God. That sounds very religious to me. That's
Yeah.
that's man stuff. But then it's what we were talking about was rather than doing something for God, partnering with God and joining him in relationship, which is different than religion, in
Mhm.
what he's doing and where he's going and what he wants done.
Yeah, my dad used to say he didn't he'd be around a lot of pastors, and the pastors would say, "Well, I feel called to preach. God called me to preach." And my dad never really liked that term. He kind of knew what they were saying, but he said, "No, you're called into a relationship. You're called to follow Jesus." He said, "I was
Hmm.
never called to preach. I was never called to be a pastor. I was called to follow Jesus." And as I followed him, that took me into the pastorate of several churches. It took me into the pulpit oftentimes. But the key was, am I going with Jesus? Wherever he leads, I'm following. And so if you focus on that relationship, out of that relationship, he may put you in a pulpit on a stage. He might put you in a slum. He could put you on a mission field. He could put you on TV. He could put you anywhere he wants. My dad went to a little church of 10 people. Everyone said he's crazy, but he ended up meeting 4 different US presidents, had meetings in the White House, spoke to
Wow.
the United Nations, spoke in the Pentagon, spoke
Wow.
to all kinds of world leaders. And you'd say, "Well, were you called to an international ministry?" No, I was called to follow Jesus. And as I followed him, he took me to some really incredible places. And so, yeah, that's why I tell people. You mentioned that, but the call is just go with him and let him tell you where he's if you follow him, you'll find yourself in some amazing venues and around some amazing people, and you'll be wondering, how on earth did I get here? How on earth am I doing this? Well, you just kept following Jesus, and he always knew what he had in store for you. You just had to stay with him. Where he goes, you go, and you won't regret it. You won't regret where you've been over the course of your life if you do.
Yes. That reminds me of that praise song from the 90s. I just want to be where you are, dwelling in your presence, dwelling daily in your presence.
Yeah,
Just be where he's at, and he's
yeah,
going to bring it all together.
and
Before we
make it
close
happen.
out, you said that there's now a new revised version of
Yeah.
Experiencing God.
Yeah, that's kind of the middle one you got there. It's been like 3 major editions of that. The very first one, and then that one you have that I did a major revision on. But about 3 years ago, about every 15 years, they've had us have had me come back to overhaul it and update it, and all the main stories are there. But millions of people go through this book, and we hear lots of feedback from people, questions or things that aren't maybe quite clear, and so on. And so we'll kind of make note of that and say, well, how can we just make this even easier to read, or just maybe address some questions that keep coming up about this part. And what's great about the new edition is if you buy one of those workbooks, it comes now with a code that lets you have access to all the DVD teaching that is a
Oh,
part of that as well. So, the book you have, you'd have to go buy a bunch of DVDs to watch me and my dad teach. But the new one, it's all free. You just download it, and actually, it's me and my oldest son teaching it. So you get a
okay.
when I was brought in for that book to do the videos, I was the young guy being brought in with my dad, and now my son is the young guy. He's a cool, good-looking, very great speaker, and so the two of us now teach it. So definitely worth that. It just comes with access to that book. So I encourage you, if you're gonna do the study, get the latest version, and it's the best one so far, and it comes with a bunch of free videos too.
So now I've learned I'm like midway obedient. So now I'm going to go out and get the full one and go on
That's
to the
right.
hyper.
You wanna be fully obedient.
That's
Yes.
right. Hyper obedience. That's the word for the night. Wow. And I would encourage everybody that's watching this, even on the replay, and those that are foreign listeners in other countries across the world that listen to the audio, Experiencing God, written by Henry and Richard Blackaby and Claude King. Get your hands on a copy. Go through the workbook. Go through the exercises. it will revolutionize your life and the way that you view God, and to be able to hear what it is that he's planned for you. And as we talked about earlier, it's not about you, it's all about him, how he wants you to partner with him in his will. Dr. Blackaby, thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you can hold on while we close out, I'd just like to talk to you personally offline. And to everybody that's with us, our viewers and listeners, we will be back next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And until then, peace out and rock on.
lithoscry.com